A man left in the darkness of the forest, tied up and hopeless, finds help from an unlikely being. What happens next will challenge everything you think you know about survival. On a cold, cloudy winter morning, Jack Mitchell felt an unexplainable tightness in his chest. The heavy atmosphere of Crystalville, where century-old trees stood imposingly and mists descended to the ground, seemed to reflect the disturbing premonition, consuming him. The cobblestone streets and historic houses of the imperial town held secrets he was about to uncover, even against his will. As a private investigator, Jack had solved numerous cases, but he'd never been as reluctant as he was. Now, the file in his hands contained information that could forever change the lives of many people, including his own. "Are you really going to deliver that report, Jack?" asked Martha, his longtime assistant, while serving a cup of strong coffee. Jack's tired eyes scanned the modest office before answering. "I don't have a choice, Martha. The Blackwood family is paying me very well to discover the truth. Even if that truth destroys reputations, even if it reveals that the family patriarch has had a second family for decades." Jack sighed deeply. Charles Blackwood built an empire of appearances. His legitimate wife, Helen, deserves to know the truth before the will is read. Martha sat in the chair across from him, concerned. "You know he has connections at every level of society, from business to politics. His empire was built on secrets, Jack, and people like him don't like it when their secrets are revealed." The investigator put the file in a folder and walked to the window. Outside, the fog covered part of Crystalville's historic downtown. The Crystal Palace rose in the distance, almost ghostly amid the mist. "Something tells me I'm being watched, Martha. Since I took this case, I feel like every step I take is being monitored." "Investigators' paranoia," she tried to downplay it, but her tone revealed she shared the same concern. The phone rang, startling them both. Jack answered hesitantly. "Hello?" "Mr. Mitchell," a trembling female voice sounded from the other end. "This is Betty, Mr. Charles Blackwood's secretary. He requests your presence at the mansion this afternoon. He said it's urgent." A chill ran down Jack's spine. Did Charles already know that he had discovered the second family? "I'll be there at 4, he replied dryly before hanging up. Martha stared at him with wide eyes. "What was it?" "Charles wants to see me this afternoon at the mansion." His assistant's face turned pale. "Don't go, Jack. I have a bad feeling about this." Jack grabbed his coat and the folder with the file. "That's exactly why I need to go. If he already knows what I discovered, I need to face him directly." Before leaving, Jack paused at the door. "If I don't come back by tomorrow, deliver a copy of this file to Helen, personally." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Don't even joke about that." Jack forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's just a precaution, you know me." Stepping out into the cold air of Crystalville, Jack felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The Blackwood mansion was secluded on top of a hill, surrounded by dense forest. The journey there would be lonely and deserted, especially with the fog that seemed to thicken more and more. As he drove along the winding road through the thick forest, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. He checked the rearview mirror several times, but the fog made visibility difficult. The only sound was that of the engine breaking the silence of the forest and the accelerated beating of his own heart. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. The Blackwood mansion appeared imposingly through the fog, its Victorian towers defying the grey sky. Jack parked his car in the deserted courtyard, intrigued by the absence of movement. For a residence of that size, the silence was disconcerting. When he rang the doorbell, no one answered. The main door was ajar, inviting him in. Reluctantly, Jack entered the sumptuous hall, where portraits of the Blackwood family watched him like silent sentinels. "Mr. Charles," he called, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Betty?" Only silence answered. Jack advanced to the library, where Charles usually received his visitors. The room was empty, but a half-full glass of whiskey rested on the desk, as if its owner had momentarily stepped away. A noise coming from the back of the mansion caught his attention. Jack followed the corridor, passing dozens of closed doors. When he reached the back door, which led to an extensive garden, he saw something unusual. A tall man wearing a dark overcoat was walking hurriedly toward the forest area. "Hey!" Jack shouted. "I'm looking for Charles Blackwood." The man turned abruptly. His face was hidden by a ski mask, but his eyes reflected recognition. Without hesitation, the stranger ran into the forest. Jack, driven by instinct, ran after him. The pursuit led him deeper and deeper into the dense vegetation surrounding the property. The fog, now thicker, hindered his vision. Jack lost track of the man, but continued advancing, determined to discover what was happening. Suddenly, two men emerged from behind the trees. Before Jack could react, he felt a blow to the back of his neck. The world around him spun, and he fell on the cold ground of the forest. The muffled laughter of the men was the last thing he heard before losing consciousness. When Jack awoke, he was tied to a tree in the middle of the forest. The cold was biting, the wind howled through the trees, and darkness was beginning to swallow any trace of light. He tried to shout, but his voice came out weak. No one could hear him in that green immensity. "No use wasting energy," said a familiar voice. From the shadows emerged the elegant figure of Charles Blackwood. The middle-aged businessman, with his perfectly combed grey hair and impeccable suit, seemed out of place in that wild environment. "Why are you doing this, Charles?" Jack asked, trying to buy time while working to loosen the ropes binding his wrists. Charles approached, examining Jack with cold eyes. "You meddled in what you shouldn't have, Mitchell. Did you really think I wouldn't know you were investigating?" "My private life. Your wife had the right to know." The businessman laughed bitterly. "Helen, my dear wife has known everything for decades. Our marriage is an arrangement of convenience, a facade to maintain appearances before society. She has her lovers. I have my second family. A silent agreement that works perfectly." Jack felt his blood freeze. If Helen already knew, who had really hired him? "If it wasn't Helen, who hired me to investigate you?" Charles's smile widened, revealing perfectly white teeth. "My own son. Richard, my firstborn, is desperate to find flaws in my character, something he could use to contest my will. He's always been too ambitious." The businessman made a gesture, and the two men who had captured Jack reappeared, dragging between them a young man of about 30 with features similar to Charles's. "Richard," Jack murmured, recognizing Charles's eldest son, whom he had interviewed weeks before. The young man was visibly shaken, with a cut on his eyebrow and his expensive clothes in disarray. "I'm sorry, Jack," Richard stammered. "He found out everything." "I just wanted what's rightfully mine." Charles approached his son and gripped his chin forcefully. "You don't understand, do you? I'm going to leave you two here reflecting on loyalty and consequences. If you survive the night in the forest, perhaps I'll reconsider your positions." With one last look of contempt, Charles and his men walked away, disappearing into the fog that was engulfing the forest. Jack and Richard were left alone, tied up, as the darkness of night inexorably approached. The wind cut like blades through the trees, and the cold of the night intensified the discomfort of the ropes binding Jack and Richard. The silence between them was broken by the young heir's contained sobs. "I just wanted to prove that he doesn't deserve the respect everyone has for him," Richard finally spoke, his voice trembling from cold and fear. "My father has always been venerated as a man of integrity, an exemplary businessman, but I grew up seeing his hypocrisy." Jack tried to stay calm, focusing on finding a way to escape. "So you hired me to expose him, to discover the second family?" "Not just that. I wanted you to discover the embezzlement of company funds, the dealings with politicians, the shady agreements with competitors. But you focused too much on the second family story." The revelation hit Jack like a punch. The case was much bigger than he had imagined. "Why didn't you tell me everything from the beginning?" Richard tried to adjust himself, groaning in pain. "Because I didn't trust you completely. I needed to be sure you were competent before revealing the entire plan." A noise in the nearby vegetation interrupted the conversation. Both fell into absolute silence, fearing it was Charles's men returning. The sound of footsteps approached, and Jack held his breath. They weren't human footsteps. They were heavier, more defined. From the darkness emerged a German shepherd of imposing stature. The animal approached cautiously, eyes gleaming in the darkness of the night. "What is a dog doing here in the middle of the forest?" Richard whispered, alarmed. Jack, equally surprised, observed the dog approach. The animal sniffed the air and walked directly toward them. It showed no aggression, only curiosity. "It must belong to some caretaker in the region," Jack replied, remaining still as the dog examined him. To their surprise, the German shepherd began to bite at the ropes binding Jack. With precise movements, the animal pulled and tore at the fibers. "This is unbelievable," Richard murmured, observing the scene with astonishment. "It seems like he's trying to free you." After a few minutes of effort, Jack felt the ropes loosen. With one final pull, he managed to free his hands. Immediately, he worked to untie his feet and then went to help Richard. "This dog is a miracle," the young man commented, massaging his wrists that had been chafed by the ropes. Jack silently agreed, observing the animal that now sat calmly, looking at them as if waiting for the next move. "We need to find a way out of here before dawn." "When your father's men return," Jack said, trying to orient himself in the darkness of the forest. Richard, still trembling, leaned against a tree. "I don't know this part of the property. I've never ventured so far into the forest." The German shepherd stood up and walked a few meters, stopping to look back as if inviting them to follow. "I think he wants us to follow him," Jack observed, intrigued by the animal's behavior. "Are you suggesting we follow a dog in the middle of the forest?" Richard questioned, incredulous. Jack shrugged. "Do you have a better idea?" Without alternatives, the two men began to follow the German shepherd through the dense vegetation. The dog seemed to know the way, choosing easier trails and avoiding areas with thorny bushes. The moon occasionally appeared between the clouds, providing some illumination. "How does a dog appear out of nowhere and know exactly how to help us?" Richard asked after they had walked for about half an hour. Jack was thinking the same thing but had no answers. "Maybe he's trained for rescue, or maybe..." "Maybe what?" Jack hesitated before continuing. "My grandmother used to say that some animals are disguised angels, sent to protect us in times of need." Richard laughed nervously. "I didn't know you were superstitious, Mitchell." "I'm not, but at this moment I'm willing to believe in anything that might get us out of this forest alive." The German shepherd stopped abruptly, ears alert. Jack and Richard froze in place, fearing that Charles's men were nearby. The dog lowered its body in a defensive position, a low growl escaping its throat. "Someone's coming," whispered Richard, fear evident in his voice. Jack pulled the young man behind a large tree, while the dog remained on the trail, alert. Footsteps approached, and a flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the forest. The flashlight beam swept through the vegetation, passing within inches of where Jack and Richard were hiding. The German shepherd, surprisingly, disappeared into the shadows without making any noise. Jack held his breath, feeling his heart hammer against his chest. "They must be around here," said a female voice, to the surprise of the two men. "Richard's cell phone GPS indicates this area." A second person responded, also with a female voice. "Betty, are you sure Charles left them here? This is madness, even for someone like him." Jack and Richard exchanged surprised looks as they recognized the voices. Betty, Charles's secretary, and Helen, the businessman's wife. "Let's show ourselves," whispered Jack. "I think they came to help us." Stepping out from behind the tree, he called, "We're here!" The flashlights immediately turned toward them, momentarily blinding them. "Thank God!" exclaimed Helen, running toward them. The elegant 50-year-old woman, always impeccable at social events, now wore jeans and hiking boots, with her grey hair tied in a practical ponytail. Betty, a woman in her 30s, followed close behind, checking the surroundings with an apprehensive expression. "We need to get out of here before Charles's men realize we're looking for you," said Betty, handing water bottles to both of them. Richard hugged his stepmother tightly, something Jack had never witnessed. "How did you find us?" asked the young man, still surprised. Helen smiled, caressing her stepson's face. I installed a tracking app on your phone months ago, after that time you disappeared for 3 days during a crisis. I just didn't expect it would be useful in a situation like this." Jack observed the interaction between the two with interest. The relationships in the Blackwood family were much more complex than he had imagined. "We need to go," insisted Betty, casting nervous glances at the trail they had come from. "Charles asked us to check if you were still here in the morning. If he discovers we helped you escape—" She didn't complete the sentence, but the fear in her eyes was eloquent. "Where's the dog?" Jack asked, looking for the German shepherd that had helped them. "What dog?" Helen questioned, confused. "A German shepherd helped us get loose and was guiding us through the forest until you arrived." The two women exchanged puzzled looks. "We didn't see any dog," said Betty, "and there's no one in the region who has a German shepherd." Jack felt a chill run down his spine, but there was no time for reflections. The group began to move quickly along the trail, illuminated by the women's flashlights. After 20 minutes of walking, they reached a dirt road where a jeep was parked. "Where do we go now?" asked Jack as everyone got into the vehicle. "It's not safe to return to town. Charles will probably have men looking for me." Helen took the wheel, starting the engine with determination. "We're going to my country house in Pinecrest. No one, except Betty, knows about it." During the journey along the deserted road, Richard finally broke the tense silence. "Why are you helping us? Especially you, Helen. I always thought you and my father were accomplices." The woman kept her eyes on the road, but a bitter smile appeared on her lips. "There was a time when I loved your father, Richard, but Charles changed over the years. Power corrupted him. I discovered the second family 15 years ago, but remained in the marriage for social convenience. And for the money," added Richard bitterly. Helen shook her head. "Not for the money, for protection. If I divorced Charles, I would lose everything, including my reputation. He is ruthless with those he considers enemies." Jack, seated in the back seat next to Richard, realized he still didn't understand all the pieces of that puzzle. "What's the real financial situation of the family, Richard? You mentioned embezzlement in the company." It was Betty who answered, turning in the passenger seat to face them. "The Blackwood empire is going bankrupt. Charles made disastrous investments in recent years and has maintained the appearance of prosperity, with enormous loans and questionable accounting schemes. He hid this from everyone, including me," added Richard. "I discovered it by chance, finding documents in his office. That's when I decided to hire you, Jack." "But why me? I'm a private investigator, not a financial auditor." Helen exchanged a significant look with Betty before answering. "Because you have a connection with this family that you can't even imagine, Jack Mitchell. A connection that Charles fears more than any financial scandal. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue." The country house in Pinecrest was an elegant and discreet construction, surrounded by a well-maintained garden and protected by a dense grove of pine trees. When the jeep parked, dawn was already showing its first signs with a faint brightening on the horizon. Inside the house, Helen lit the fireplace while Betty prepared tea for everyone. Jack observed every detail of the environment, particularly noticing the photographs on the piano. Among images of Helen at various moments in her life, there was one that caught his attention, a young woman with delicate features, holding a baby. "Who is this?" he asked, pointing to the photograph. Helen approached, picking up the frame with affection. "This is my younger sister, Claire. And the baby is you, Jack." The revelation fell like a bomb. Jack felt his legs weaken and needed to sit down. Richard, who had just entered the room, stopped abruptly, as surprised as the investigator. "This doesn't make sense," Jack stammered. "My parents died in an accident when I was 2 years old. I was raised by my maternal grandmother in Chicago." Helen sat beside him, her green eyes so similar to his, shining with contained tears. "Claire was my younger sister. She fell in love with an employee of Charles's company, Edward Mitchell. When she got pregnant, Charles opposed the relationship. Edward was of humble origin, and according to my husband, was not suitable for our family. Betty entered with a tray containing cups of tea, placing it on the center table. Claire and Edward fled to Chicago, continued Helen. They lived in hiding for 2 years until they died in a car accident, completed Jack, feeling his head spin with so much information. Helen exchanged a significant look with Betty. It wasn't an accident, Jack. Charles ordered Edward's car to be sabotaged. He didn't intend for Claire to be with him, but she decided to accompany her husband on that last-minute trip. A heavy silence fell over the room. Jack felt blood pulsing in his temples, anger growing in his chest. "Are you telling me that Charles Blackwood is responsible for the loss of my parents?" he asked, avoiding the word he feared most. Helen nodded, tears now freely running down her face. When he found out what happened, Charles was devastated, not for Edward's death, but for having indirectly caused the loss of Claire. He tried to find you, but your maternal grandmother had already taken custody of you and changed your surname to protect you. My grandmother always told me it was dangerous to use my mother's surname, Jack murmured, remembering. I grew up as Jack Smith, not Jack Mitchell. Your grandmother knew the truth, confirmed Helen. She feared Charles might try something against you too. Richard, who had remained silent, finally spoke. So Jack is my cousin. Is that why you helped me hire him, Helen? The woman nodded. When Richard told me about his suspicions of his father's business dealings, I saw an opportunity to finally do justice. I researched your whereabouts for years, Jack. When I discovered you had become a private investigator, I knew it was destiny at work. Jack stood up, too agitated to remain seated. Why does Charles fear me? I didn't even know about this connection until now. It was Betty who answered. Because you are the legitimate heir to half of the Blackwood fortune. Claire was the daughter from the first marriage of Helen's father, old Augustus Blackwood. In his will, it was established that the fortune would be equally divided between his daughters, Helen and Claire, and their direct descendants. Charles manipulated documents so that all the inheritance would go to Helen, and consequently to him, as her husband, completed Richard. But if you, as Claire's only son, appear and claim your part, his whole scheme falls apart, concluded Jack, beginning to understand the dimension of the situation. Helen approached him, taking his hands in hers. There's more, Jack. The will has a specific clause. If one of the heirs causes harm to another, they automatically lose their right to the inheritance. If we prove that Charles was responsible for what happened to your parents, even if it was through Helen, the entire fortune passes to you. The morning sun was beginning to illuminate the room through the large windows. Jack observed the golden light touch the faces of those present, each carrying the weight of long-kept secrets. And how do we prove this after so many years? He asked, his voice firmer now. Betty opened her purse and took out a flash drive. With this, as Charles's secretary for 8 years, I had access to documents he believed were destroyed, including the written confession of the man who sabotaged your parents' car. The sun was already high when Jack finished analyzing the documents on Betty's flash drive. The evidence was incontestable. Payment contracts, coded emails, and the signed confession of a former security guard of Charles's, detailing how he had sabotaged the brakes of Edward Mitchell's car. This is enough to report Charles to the authorities, said Jack, closing the laptop. Richard, who was looking out the window, shook his head. You don't know my father. He has judges and police chiefs on his payroll. A conventional complaint would be filed away before it was even registered. Helen entered the room carrying a tray with breakfast. Richard is right. We need to be strategic. Charles is holding a grand event at the mansion tonight to announce his daughter Lucy's engagement to the governor's son. All the high society of Crystalville and beyond will be present. A perfect moment to confront him publicly, suggested Petty. Jack looked at the three, pondering. That would be too risky. Charles wouldn't hesitate to harm us again if we cornered him. A thoughtful silence took over the room until Richard snapped his fingers, an idea illuminating his face. The will. The original will of old Augustus Blackwood. Charles has always kept the document locked in the safe in his office at the mansion. If we can access it during the party, we'll have definitive proof that Jack is a legitimate heir. And how would we do that? Questioned Jack, still skeptical. Helen smiled, a determined gleam in her eyes. I'm still Mrs. Blackwood. I can enter the party without raising suspicions. And I know the safe combination. Charles has certainly noticed your disappearance. By now, he'll be suspicious if you show up at the party as if nothing happened, Betty pointed out. Not if I say I spent the night at my friend Margaret's house in Ridgefield, as I always do when we fight. It wouldn't be the first time, Helen replied with a shrewd smile. And what about us? Asked Jack, pointing to himself and Richard. Betty took her cell phone, typing quickly. I have a friend who works as security at the mansion. He can help. Just enter through the back, using the tumult of the party as cover. Richard approached Jack, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's risky, but it's our best chance. Are you willing to face this risk for justice? Jack looked at the photograph of his mother, Claire, on the piano. The same green eyes as his looked at him from the image, as if asking him to make the right decision. Let's do it, he answered. With determination. During the rest of the day, the group carefully planned every detail of the operation. Helen returned to the main mansion in the early afternoon, as if she were coming back from Ridgefield, to avoid raising suspicions. As she had predicted, Charles didn't question her absence, too busy with preparations for that evening's event. At 8 o'clock, the Blackwood mansion sparkled with hundreds of lights. Luxury cars paraded through the main entrance, bringing the cream of state society. Musicians played in the illuminated garden, and waiters circulated with trays of champagne and canapes. At the back of the property, near the service entrance, Jack, Richard, and Betty waited for the agreed signal. Betty's friend, dressed in the security team's uniform, approached stealthily. I got these credentials for you, he said, handing over food service staff badges. But be quick. The security personnel shift change in the main corridor will be in 20 minutes. Dressed in service team uniforms that Betty had provided, they infiltrated the mansion. The main hall was full of elegantly dressed guests, all focused on the improvised stage where Charles was toasting with his future son-in-law. Jack felt a tightness in his chest, seeing Charles Blackwood in person for the first time. The man who had indirectly caused so much suffering in his life seemed so normal, so charismatic as he smiled at his guests. This is our chance, whispered Richard. My father will be busy with the formal announcement for at least half an hour. Following the plan, they separated. Betty remained in the hall, serving drinks and monitoring Charles's movements. Richard positioned himself near the main staircase, ready to alert if anyone headed to the second floor. Jack, following Helen's precise instructions, went to Charles's office. The corridor was deserted as expected. The office door was locked, but Helen had provided a copy of the key. Upon entering the imposing room with its walls covered in dark wood and shelves full of antique books, Jack felt a strange familiarity. It was as if part of him recognized that place, that legacy that had been denied to him. The safe was hidden behind a painting, exactly where Helen had described. Jack rotated the dial with the combination 07-1845, Claire's date of birth. With a soft click, the safe opened. Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. Inside the metal compartment were various organized folders, antique, jewelry in velvet cases, and some documents yellowed by time. His fingers found a red folder marked Augustus Blackwood's will. Opening it, he came face to face with an official document, dated 1985 with the seal of a Crystalville notary. His hands trembled as he read the clauses that confirmed everything Helen had told him. The fortune was to be divided equally between Helen and Claire, and their descendants. A specific paragraph caught his attention. Should any of the heirs or their spouses deliberately cause physical, emotional, or financial harm to another heir or their descendants, they will automatically lose their right to the inheritance, which will be fully reverted to the injured party or their direct descendants. My God, Jack murmured. It's all true. He tucked the will into the inner pocket of his jacket and continued examining the contents of the safe. In a brown envelope, he found old photographs. A young Helen alongside Claire, both smiling, Claire and Edward at their discreet wedding, and, to his surprise, a photo of himself as a baby, in his parents' arms, with a dedication on the back. To my brother Charles, meet your nephew Jack. I hope that one day we can be a united family. With love, Claire. The discovery hit him like a punch. Charles had known about him from the beginning. It wasn't just a matter of inheritance. It was a family secret that the businessman had tried to bury. The cell phone in his pocket vibrated. It was a message from Richard. "My father is coming up. Get out of there now." Jack quickly closed the safe, replaced the painting in its original position, and looked around to make sure he hadn't left any traces. When he was about to go out the door, he heard footsteps in the corridor. There was no time to escape. In an impulse, he hid behind a heavy velvet curtain covering one of the windows. Through a small gap, he saw Charles enter the office, accompanied by a man he didn't know. "Are you sure about this, Alexander?" asked Charles, visibly tense. The man, tall and with a severe appearance, nodded. "My contacts confirmed it. Jack, Mitchell is the son of Claire and Edward, and somehow he discovered the connection." Charles punched the desk forcefully. "This cannot come to light now, not with the merger negotiations underway. If the board discovers I'm about to lose half the empire to a nephew I never mentioned—" "There's more," interrupted Alexander. "Betty is involved. She accessed old company files in recent weeks. I believe she found evidence about the incident." "With Edward?" Charles's face paled. "Where is Helen now?" "In the hall talking with the governor. She seems normal." Charles walked to the window, so close to Jack that he could smell the businessman's expensive cologne. For a terrible moment he thought he would be discovered, but Charles merely looked at the illuminated garden below. "We need to act quickly. Claire's son cannot ruin everything I've built." "And what do you suggest?" asked Alexander. Charles moved away from the window to Jack's relief. "Do you still have contacts in the federal police? I want this Mitchell arrested before he can approach any lawyer. Make something up, drugs, forged documents, I don't care." "And what about Betty?" A cold smile formed on Charles's lips. "Leave her to me. I have plans for my dedicated secretary." The two men left the office, leaving Jack stunned by what he had just heard. As soon as the door closed, he emerged from his hiding place and sent urgent messages to Richard and Betty. In the main hall, Helen watched attentively as Charles descended the stairs with Alexander. The affable smile the businessman displayed for the guests contrasted with the calculating look she knew so well. Something was wrong. Her cell phone vibrated discreetly. It was a message from Jack. "Charles knows everything. Plan B, now." Helen felt her heart race. Plan B was a contingency they had discussed if everything went wrong, an immediate public exposure with all the evidence. It was risky, but now it was the only option. She made a discreet gesture to the photographer hired for the event, who was actually an investigative journalist Richard knew. He nodded, understanding the signal. Charles went up to the improvised stage, taking the microphone to make the official announcement of his daughter's engagement. His smile was radiant as the camera flashes went off. "Dear friends and family, it is with immense joy that I officially announce the engagement of my daughter Lucy to Daniel, son of our illustrious governor." Applause echoed through the hall. Charles raised his glass for a toast, but stopped when he saw Helen going up to the stage, followed by Jack, Richard, and Betty. His face momentarily contorted in an expression of fury, quickly masked by a forced smile. "Oh, it appears my wife wants to share some words as well," he said, trying to maintain his composure. Helen took the microphone, her serene gaze meeting Charles's. "Yes, dear. In fact, I have something very important to share with all our esteemed guests." An expectant silence took over the hall as Helen held the microphone. The guests, sensing the tension between the hosts, exchanged curious glances. Charles tried to take the microphone back, but Helen moved away with elegance. "Before we proceed with the celebrations," she began, her firm voice echoing in the room, "I would like to make a very special introduction. This young man by my side," she placed her hand on Jack's shoulder, "is Jack Mitchell, son of my dear sister Claire." Surprised murmurs ran through the hall. The older members of Crystalville society widened their eyes, recognizing Claire's name. which had long not been mentioned in social circles. Charles, trying to maintain his composure, approached with a forced smile. "It's a charming family reunion, dear, but perhaps we could save this for a more private moment." "No, Charles," Helen replied, maintaining her serene smile. "This is exactly the right moment. Our friends deserve to know the whole story of the Blackwood family." At that moment, 3 men in dark suits discreetly entered the hall, positioning themselves near the exits. Jack recognized one of them as Alexander, the man who had been in the office with Charles. He immediately understood. Charles had called reinforcements to stop them. Richard, noticing the movement, made a gesture to the journalist, who immediately began live broadcasting on his cell phone to a major news channel. Betty walked to the sound system and connected the flash drive containing the evidence against Charles. The large screens in the hall, which had been displaying photos of the engaged couple, now showed incriminating documents. "For 25 years, Helen continued, my husband has hidden the truth about the fate of my sister Claire and her husband, Edward. He hid that it was he who orchestrated the accident that took them from this world, just because Edward didn't belong to our social class." Exclamations of shock echoed through the hall. The governor, who was in the front row, stood up with an indignant expression, pulling his son away from the stage. Charles, seeing his world crumble, abandoned the pretense of calm. "This is absurd," he shouted, trying to advance toward Helen. Jack positioned himself between them, confronting his uncle for the first time. "We have all the evidence, Uncle Charles. The confession of the man who sabotaged my parents' car, your emails ordering the job, and the original will of my grandfather Augustus, which you've hidden for decades." The mention of the will made Charles's face turn pale. He looked frantically at Alexander, who began to approach the stage. "Mr. Blackwood," an authoritative voice sounded from the entrance of the hall, "you are being summoned to provide clarification about serious accusations." To everyone's surprise, especially Charles's, a group of federal agents entered the premises, led by a middle-aged woman with a firm posture. "Agent Marquez?" Charles stammered, recognizing her. "There must be some mistake. You no longer have any influence over me or the FBI, Mr. Blackwood," interrupted the agent. "We have received concrete evidence of serious crimes committed by you, including manipulation of evidence in a case of vehicular sabotage, testamentary fraud, and attempted bribery of authorities." Alexander and his men tried to leave discreetly, but were stopped by other agents at the exits. In the midst of the confusion that followed, Jack felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw an elderly man with white hair and deeply blue eyes. "You must be Jack," said the gentleman with an emotional voice. "I knew your parents. I worked as a gardener for the Blackwoods for 50 years. You knew my parents?" Jack asked, surprised. The old man smiled. "Yes, and I also knew Thor, the German shepherd that belonged to your mother. Claire adored him. After the incident with your parents, Thor disappeared. Some say he ran into the forest near the mansion and was never seen again." A chill ran down Jack's spine as he remembered the German shepherd that had helped him in the forest. Could it be possible? While Charles was escorted out amid camera flashes and indignant murmurs from the guests, Helen approached Jack and, "The gardener?" "August," she exclaimed, hugging the elderly man. "You came." "I wouldn't miss this for anything, Mrs. Helen," he replied, with a complicit smile. Finally, justice for Claire and Edward. 3 months later, the Blackwood mansion was transformed, with Charles facing multiple charges and having lost his right to the inheritance according to the clause in Augustus's will. The property now legally belonged to Jack and Helen, who decided to transform it into a cultural and social assistance center. In the extensive garden, Jack walked alongside Richard, who now legitimately managed the family companies, rebuilding them on ethical foundations. "I still can't believe we did it," commented Richard. "Restructuring the entire company, recovering the family's reputation, and finding the truth," completed Jack. "That's the most important thing." They stopped near a rose bed where Betty, now executive director of the Blackwood Foundation, supervised the installation of a statue, the bronze figure of a German shepherd, with a plaque that said, "Thor, symbol of loyalty and protection. Do you really believe it was the spirit of your mother's dog that saved us that night in the forest?" asked Richard, half skeptical, half fascinated. Jack looked toward the horizon, where the mountains of Crystalville rose majestically against the blue sky. "I can't explain what happened that night," he answered. "But I've learned that some connections transcend time and distance. My mother's love found a way to protect me, even after so long." Helen approached, carrying an old wooden box. "I found more photographs and letters from Claire," she said, emotional. "And also this." She took from the box a leather collar faded by time, with a small metal tag that read Thor. Suddenly, a distant bark sounded from the edge of the forest. The three turned, surprised, but saw nothing beyond the trees gently swaying in the breeze. "Did you hear that?" asked Helen with goosebumps. Jack smiled, feeling a deep peace spread through his being. "Yes," he answered simply. "It's just an old friend saying goodbye." As the sun set over the Blackwood property, Jack felt that a cycle was completing itself. The truth had finally overcome the shadows of the past, and new beginnings were announcing themselves on the horizon, as promising as the dawn that would come after that night. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us which city you're watching from.